just lied.
Oh.
Yeah, Miss Sierra, I gave you that iPad.
She's brazy.
Do you know that?
Right? Want a camera? I'll
Why
get
is-
you a professional camera for some extra credit.
You really think about it?
You get 0.2% extra credit.
15 points extra credit.
So, how what?
15 points to
You
your
can have
homework.
mine for free for extra credit. I'll tell you like 2 whole letters or something.
That's very weird, but anyway.
Oh, you got a new tripod too.
No, I'm gonna get a new tripod.
That is the same
That
one.
quality is right.
Yeah, this quality is a lot better.
Yo, we can actually see the board.
Wait,
Yo,
wait,
for
wait.
real.
Yeah.
Yo, for real.
That iPad is
I couldn't watch the movie.
Okay, wait. So I'm gonna watch this later to see if like it really is good.
Yeah, his
Is
iPad
it really? Is it better?
I don't know if his camera is better, but doesn't mean the stream up there, upload is better.
Yeah.
Baby.
Oh, yeah.
Is that true? I don't know.
Can I get on my phone?
Yeah,
I'll
it
check the
depends
stream.
on the
I'll
internet.
check it the stream.
Whose phone is this? Oh wait.
Because if you're just like filming away,
Weird.
does the internet come from the stream?
Well, tell me this one.
If you're just filming it and then posting it, so that's different quality.
Instagram really.
Oh, okay.
They do it now like.
That makes a lot more sense.
Pretty careful.
All you know is this little over.
Like imagine
Oh
if you
yeah,
do
the
like
quality
this
is.
and then it'll go.
I think better.
Is it better?
Hey, get
Is
that
it
phone out of
better?
here.
Wait, let me rewind. Rewind
I'm
so I
getting
can
that
see my
iPad
face.
first.
It's rewind time.
So.
And I'll be happy again, so you don't want
Shut up. Wait, wait.
Are you ready?
you because you broke my camera.
Ew, look at it. That's
Okay, so
I want to donate
Um,
you a bag.
what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about inverse function. Here's the inverse function. So y equal to sine of x. You don't need to copy down. You just need to understand what is going up. Y equal to sine of x. Y equal to this domain negative pi over 2 to pi over 2, and range is negative 1 to 1. You don't need to copy this down again. You can just take a picture or whatever. This one's not that important. The most important is the bottom part. The bottom part is the graphing part. So we're going to talk about that. So let's talk about something that is very interesting about inverse function. Inverse function is offering you a tool for you to go forward and then backwards. So it's like the backward tool. So the things about it is a lot of people struggle when going backwards. For example, if I have y equal to x squared, and we say, okay, well, here's the problem, y equal to x squared. If I graph it, I'm gonna get this, right? Can I have inverse with these functions? No. You cannot have an inverse of this function. The reason why is
negative x squared wouldn't make sense, right? That one?
sort of, but why does it make sense? We talked about inverse function before, first night week. We said inverse, in order the function to have inverse, it must pass some type of test. No, that's the test. Vertical line test is on your SAT. That is to test whether it can be a function. So if you have a circle, that's not a function because you failed the vertical line test. Okay? But if you have a circle, you also fail another test,
The horizontal one.
the horizontal line test. So that means this case it would have failed because
Oh, yeah.
it will fail horizontal line test. Now, in order to have function have inverse, it must pass horizontal line test. It must be monotonic. I don't know if you guys ever heard that term before. I talked about it.
What does that mean?
Monotonic means strictly increasing. So in this case, the function is decreasing, the function is increasing. So therefore, it fails for horizontal line test. If the function only increase, then it can pass horizontal line test. So therefore, it's called monotonic. In order function inverse. So in order to have function, a function, it has inverse must pass horizontal line test. Okay, must pass horizontal line test. So that's the first condition. Horizontal line test is just saying it's monotonic increase.
For it to be an inverse function?
Monotonic, it must be monotonic. 3, it must be one-to-one functions. I remember that's on the test question, and a lot of people was like, what is one-to-one? Okay, so it must pass horizontal line test, monotonic. Monotonic means strictly increasing or strictly decreasing. Strictly increasing or decreasing. So therefore, that is a problem. So y equal to x squared cannot have an inverse until I do something about it. What can I do? Well, we know the inverse of x squared is square root. But what can I do? Well, I can erase half the graph. I can go like this, right? And I say, hey, now I can have an inverse. So the inverse is going to be y equal to square root x, which just kind of makes sense. It's going this way. And this, if I were to draw an inverse, it's going to be like this. And there's symmetry to y equal to x. Like before we talked about y equal to x is the symmetry lines. So square root x has to be just that positive part. So if you do an inverse, it's going to be that part. If you have this one here, then here's right here, then it's not going to have exactly reciprocal to the other side. So that's one thing to the other. So now what we're doing with sine graph. So sine graph, can they pass horizontal line test? So let's look at a sine graph. The sine graph looks like this. So sine of x. So it's going like this, right? So can it pass horizontal line test? No. So I'm going to start using my finger, start erasing, and tell me when to stop though. So I'm going to start erasing here. I'm going to tell me when to stop. So it still fail, right? It still fail. Okay, stop right here. So you're going to have a small worm-like shape. And that worm-like shape is going to create a restriction. If I were to look at here, that's a quarter period. We know period is 2 pi for sine, so quarter period therefore is going to be pi over 2. And it's going to be negative pi over 2. So therefore, you have to have some type of restriction. That's why you have negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. That's a restriction. And the range is going to be negative 1 to 1, because here is going to be 1 and then negative 1. So that is the input. This is the output.
Is that always, or is that just the
Always, yes. For sine, in order to have an inverse, in order for them to have inverse. So the inverse is going to go down to here. In order for the cosine to have inverse, it must be 0 to pi. Why 0 to pi? So let's check the cosine graph. If I were to check cosine graph, it's going to be like this, start at a maximum. It was like this, right? So if I were to erase both sides simultaneously, so it doesn't matter what I erase, even I erase all the way here, if I do a line test here, it will fail. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to erase from this part. Make sure on the right side it passes. So I'm going to stop right here on the right side. Just look at the right side. It passed right
That's
now.
the inverse that you're doing now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now I'm going to erase from this side and tell me when to stop.
Stop.
Wait, are you looking at the left or the right?
I'm looking at the whole graph.
Oh,
Keep going.
Keep on going, right?
keep going to the.
Keep on going.
Yeah.
Keep on going to here, right? So this one end up to be half the graph, so 0 to pi. So that's how I get 0 to pi.
So D stands for restriction?
D stands for domain. R stands for range.
D stands for restriction. Honestly, no, I would do the same thing. If you wouldn't have said it, I probably would have.
No, that's a good question because most of you guys don't know what the D stands for and R stands for.
I know.
D stands for dad.
I know what all the D's stand for. Whoa.
Now, the tangent graph is already restricted. If you remember, a tangent graph looks like this, right? The tangent graph is already negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. It's like this. So it's a negative pi over 2 and the pi over 2. It's just like the sine graph. So I should put it right next to each other. This is a tangent graph. So they're already restricted. So now we're going to go in to look for the inverse. Inverse is right here. Sine inverse. Cosine inverse. Tangent inverse. So this is the restriction in order to have the inverse. Now, what happened with the restriction? What happened with those two? They flop. Just like we switch x and y on inverse function. You switch, you switch, you switch. Everything switch. Now this becomes the input. Input is going to be -1 to 1. If anything outer than -1 and 1, it's not going to give you a functions. Okay, so it has to be -1 to 1. The output, however, is going to be -π/2 to π/2, which is that's what we're going to learn today. And the input is -1 to 1. The output is between 0 to pi. Same thing on this one. The only thing difference between those two is the parenthesis and bracket, because this is a parenthesis because it's not including the asymptotes. So then you say, oh, okay, I get it. Now here's what I'm going to draw a shortcut for you. The most important thing is not this part of the notes. It's actually just this part. This is a sine inverse of x. It's -π/2 to π/2 in the unit circle. I'm going to do it in terms of unit circle, so this is told me the radians. And this one's going to be 0 to pi. So I draw it for you to help you to understand. It's top two quadrant. And this is right two quadrant. Okay? Now we're going to start asking questions. What kind of question I'm going to be asking? I'm going to asking, what are the input versus output in this case? Now remember, let's go back to this case. So can I erase this part or no?
Yeah.
Or you need to take a picture before you go?
No, you don't have to do it.
There's a video.
Still, I like having everything on my phone.
Get those stretches in. How am I gonna take your picture?
Okay, so I might erase this part. So again, it's on video, so it's not that bad. So now we're gonna ask some hard part is this. So remember we talked about the square root one. It says y is equal to square root of x, right? What's that? What is y value when x is equal to 9? What happened? Y is equal to 3. So y equal to square root of 9 is equal to 3, right? Now what if I say, well, what if y is equal to 3? What if y is equal to 3? What is x?
9.
Well, it's just basically 3 is equal to square root of x, right? And then 3 squared, so it's going to be 9 is equal to x. So x is equal to 9. He said, okay, that's just asking question backward. That's what the whole idea is. The whole idea is to be able to think backwards. Like you said, let's change just a tiny bit. Let's change the question a tiny bit. So it's y equal to x squared. Okay?
Yeah.
And then we say x is equal to 3. What is y value? 9, right? Now what if I says, so this is the first case. What if the second case? What if I say y is equal to 9? What is x?
3.
Now this becomes a very interesting question because if you have y equal to 9, it's equal to x squared, right? If I square root both sides, what am I going to get?
-3 positive.
Good job, Aiden.
I see. I thought of that. I said like that though.
Plus minus 3. But in order for the function to have a inverse, it must have a restriction. So I should restrict this first. Therefore, if I go back, the answer should be only positive 3 only. If I restricted this. If I says x has to be greater than 0. Right? Then we have to restrict this. We says x has to be greater than 0, therefore x has to be 3, not -3. However, the answer is plus minus 3. We're going to see the same situation happen here. So let's go do something that's easy. So I'm going to erase this part. I'm going to say, hey, let's give you a simple question like yesterday's homework. Let's say is, what is sine of 7 pi over 6? Nobody say anything. I'll give you 20 seconds to think about what the sine of 7 pi over 6 is. Don't say it. 5 more seconds. Katarina? Yeah. Huh? Sine 7 pi over 6.
It's easy.
I need extra one.
Sine is y though.
No. There you go.
Oh, dear.
Now, here's a question you have to be careful.
Yeah.
So what's the nice thing about this? If I would ask you backwards, so let's just say, today I don't know what this angle is, right? Can I say we're gonna assume that angle is equal to negative half?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, okay, I got this. Now, I want to figure out what an angle is gonna give you y value is negative half. Now this turns out to be a very difficult question. So then we say, well, here's what we're gonna do is we're gonna get rid of sine. If we get rid of sine, how do I get rid of sine?
Multiply by weight divided.
You cannot divide by sine, no. Because this data is within the sine function. So it's called composite function. So what we can do is do something different. The difference is we can do sine inverse of sine. So this one is going to cancel out.
Oh.
Well, not all the time it cancel out. We're going to talk about restrictions. So, sorry, there was no data anymore.
I was gonna say.
Because Katarina gave me that look. It's like, why is sine still there? So sine data, sine of negative half. So I can ask you this today. I say, what is sine inverse of negative half? That means the ratio, the y ratio is going to be negative half. What is my data? What is my data? So now it becomes this question. This question, the answer turned out to be much harder than it looks. The answer is going to be what? What do you think the answer is? Now let's ignore everything on the top.
7 pi over 6 is gonna be the answer, but
Okay, no, well 7 pi over 6 are not an answer, unfortunately. If I have this, if I just have this part, the 7 pi over 6 does not end up to be the answer because it turns out there's a problem.
That can be
Okay, so
negative pi.
we have a choice, right? 7 pi over 6. And Daniel says, how about 11 pi over 6?
No, you didn't.
Then, but we say both answers are wrong.
It's
Stupid,
negative
you're wrong
pi
too.
over 6.
No, but you guys are on a good track though. The 7 pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6 is possibly give you negative half. But it turns out sine inverse has a restriction. What's my restriction? Between negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. So that means this, pay attention here. Think about this part as like some type of electric gate, right? Some type of electric gate. It's right here. It's a place right here that if you go do it, you will die. Every time you go do this part, you die because that was like domain restriction. So you go into here, you die. You go into here, you die. But you cannot die twice. Just like imagine if I have 11 pi over 6. 11 pi over 6 is going to go here. You die twice. How about 7 pi over 6? You die once on the top. So you die once or twice, they die either way, so therefore that's not an answer. But there's a way to avoid it. Make it negative what? Negative pi over 6. So just imagine this. I says, hey, Jaden, I'm going to give you a car, right? I'm going to say, Jaden, I'm going to give you a car. Right now we're in Orlando, Florida. We says, hey, Jaden, I want you to drive to Alabama. And then Jaden says, yeah, I can drive to Alabama. I'm going to be super cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm driving toward Daytona. And I'm driving through Atlantic Ocean to the Cape Town, Africa. And you're driving under the water and you drown like 6 times. And then before you get to Cape Town, and then you go to Cape Town, you say you want to tip in Africa. So then you drive again, you drive to China. And then you drive more, go to the Pacific Ocean. This time it's even worse. You drive through the Pacific Ocean, go to California. And you find a land on the ground, and then you drive to Alabama. What you could have done is this. Instead of going here, which is you're gonna die, which is your Atlantic Ocean, and then here is the Pacific Ocean. You could go straight up to I-75 and go into Alabama right here,
Why don't you do that?
and which is negative pi with. So it's a restriction comes to the problem now. Restriction comes into the problem, says, hey, this is how I restrict it, how would you work? And then you're gonna go to it. So here is when we're gonna ask you a question again. So what if I have 10 inverse of -1? So it's equal to data. What will be the data? 10 inverse of -1. What will be that data? Now think about when this tangent is going to give you 1 first. That's not down to 4 choices. And then think about which choice is going to give you a negative. That's down to 2 choices. Now think about restriction. It will get down to 1 choices. So you got start with 4 potential choices. When does that give you 1? Okay. When does that give you a 10 of -1? And then when does that give you the inverse within the restriction? So if you follow those 3 conditions, you should get the right answer immediately. So on the next test coming to run, is the people get it right away or people don't get it at all? It doesn't matter what you try.
Damn, that's impressive.
Those are people who already get it.
Isn't that negative?
Well, who knows it?
Wrong.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Bendy, what'd you get? 10 inverse of -1.
Oh, finish solving.
Oh, you should. Don't lose this. This is a good way to study for the test. Because I'm not recreating this one.
That's a practice test or?
I'm gonna use this.
Kind of, but this section only. So
Japanese, is that what you said?
So what's 10 inverse of -1? What are the 4 choices?
Isn't it a date? Is it?
No, don't say it.
I thought you said 10 inverse negative.
You like that you can say it though. What do you think? You don't know? When's the tangent going to give you 1?
I didn't.
You can tell me. What's tangent give you 1? Tangent what radian is going to give you 1? What radian?
Mister, I think I got it.
What is it?
Shit.
Yo, Jay, you don't have it. Stop.
Something like it.
No.
Ask
Oh,
him.
there's a two.
Marion, what do you think?
Wait,
Which tangent gives you 1, right?
Yeah.
It's not like
Pi over.
pi over 4, yeah.
Good. All the pi over 4. So you got pi over 4,
I said pi.
3 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, and 7 pi over 4. But which one's going to give you -1? 7 pi over 4 and which one?
3 times.
So what would be the answer?
Negative.
The answer is -pi over 4.
Easy.
So it's equal to -pi over 4. So theta is equal to -pi over 4. Think about -1, right? So think about when does it give you 1? That means sine of theta and cosine of theta had to give you exact same value. That only happened at where?
Pi over 4.
Pi over 4. So you got pi over 4, you got 3 pi over 4, you got 5 pi over 4, you got 7 pi over 4. But which one's going to give you negative? Well, negative is going to be on one positive negative region. So it's second quadrant and fourth quadrant. So you think about this, right? Tangent is opposed to x and y. And here's a positive, positive, right? And here's a negative, positive. And now here's a positive, negative. And now here's a negative, negative. So this one, tangent both positive. Tangent both negative. But then you say this quadrant is out of restriction because it cannot pass through that electric gate, right? So it must die here. So then therefore the only choice is this one. And this one it all depends on how you're gonna get there. You had to get there this way, so that's equal to -pi over 4. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll give you another one. What is cosine inverse of negative square root 3 over 2. What do you think that is? So instead of before, this is the last stage. Remember I told you, unit circle is just only in the beginning. And then exact value, the yesterday's homework, that's sine of 7 pi over 6, that's the secondary. The third step is that multiplication table. So what if I say 42? Can you tell me which two number multiplied by 42? That's the way I'm asking right now.
21 and 2.
What is it?
21 and 2.
Okay, well, yes, I'm asking this question.
You said what two numbers equal?
Yeah, it's 21 over 2, but there's actually more than one answer. 7 times 6, 21 times 2, 42 times 1,
I think I got it.
3 times 14.
Power
It has so many answers. You only give me one answer. But that was not necessary. You have to know all those things.
It's cosine, so the restrictions are different, right?
Restrictions are different. What is restriction?
0 to plus.
0 to 5. Yeah, that makes sense.
Pi over 6.
Isn't negative?
Huh?
Pi over 6.
Isn't it?
Nope.
Wait,
No.
negative, right? No,
Nope.
isn't it 5 times 6? So you have it soon?
Yes.
How could pi over 6 not work? If
Pi over 6 is going to give you positive square root 3 over 2, but this is negative square root 3 over 2.
I didn't see a negative.
So therefore, this one is what?
5 pi over 6.
5 pi over 6.
No, yeah, I got it.
Wait, what? Huh?
So now I'm going to ask you some tough one.
He's doing this, so you can't do this now.
This is a question right here. This one is tough because this one's you're going to walk from inside out. So sine inverse of negative square root 2 over 2, and then there's a cosine outside. So think about it. Inverse is going to give you some type of angle. An angle, cosine of angle is going to give me some type of x value probably. So what would be the answer for this one?
Okay, so negative 2 over 2, right?
So cosine inverse of sine
Are you saying
negative square
I
root.
really don't know what any of the fucking radius are.
Negative.
So it'd be like negative
Sine, right?
cosine is negative 5 over 4. Let's see, actually, I go to the gym, but it's positive square root of 2 over 2, understand?
What is it?
Positive square root of 2 over 2?
That's perfect.
Wait, how did you
Let's
do it?
go, I got that.
Wait, hold up, no.
Funny. We just did it together. No, you didn't. You did it the second time. Oh.
So this part, right?
Yeah.
It's gonna be what?
Oh, X.
Is it negative?
Oh.
Seven.
Yeah, negative pi over.
I feel like we speak another language, people don't understand.
Oh, yeah.
And then cosine of negative pi over 4, that's gonna give you square root 2 over 2. Positive.
Right.
Wait, and then cosine of that.
Cosine, that means the x value at this radius.
It's like doing, like, you know, function. Okay, yeah.
Oh, it's not inverse, so you just find the normal cosine. Right?
Yeah.
Easier.
So it's two ways to ask a question. The other one, those in your worksheet, there's two different ways. It may be asked you this way. What is sine of pi over 3? What is sine of pi over 3? Square root 3 over 2, right? Then what is sine inverse square root 3 over 2? Then it's come back to pi over 3. But you have to be careful, not all questions like that. So cosine of 4 pi over 3 is what?
Yo, shout out. I see where it's coming from. I just went to so, yo, can you figure out
Okay, this is the homework, the
It's
worksheet.
negative
that's-
No, I'm gonna give you something, the first two questions, let's say.
Negative.
That's all?
Yeah, first two, like this part.
Okay, hold on.
And I might ask you like,
Oh, the first two, because they have like.
I'm a little slow.
but you have to understand, make sure you understand everything.
you post homework earlier?
Yeah, that's the first two questions.
The first two questions on the